Hey y'all, it's your favorite wedding planner, Rachel Burt Garcia, owner of As You Wish Events, here today to talk to you about my top 10 tips for how to get the most value out of your wedding budget. So my first tip on how to get the most bang for your buck on your wedding is actually to create a budget spreadsheet. If you don't have a clear set plan, it's really hard to figure out how much money you want to spend on each category. So by creating a budget spreadsheet, thinking about the number of guests that you're having, all of the possible vendors and bits and pieces that are going to go into the wedding day, just creating a line item list and then assigning a monetary figure to it will really help you create a plan and create a starting point to really go off of for your budget. Because if you don't have that starting point, you're kind of flying blind as you're reaching out to vendors. Thinking through what you're gonna spend in each category can become kind of scary because you really don't have an overall number that you're trying to stick within if you haven't created that spreadsheet from the very start. So I really suggest starting off by just creating that budget spreadsheet so you have a game plan. Tip 2 is huge, you guys. The biggest piece of advice that I can give you when it comes to scaling down your wedding budget is to scale down your guest list. If you think about it, the more guests that come, the more guests that have to eat, have to drink, you have to find a seat for them, you have to send them an invitation. I mean, the list goes on and on. So the more guests that you have, the more your budget is going to increase. So the easiest way to slash your wedding budget is to slash that guest list. Tip number 3 is to actually consider other days of the week besides Saturday. So a lot of times Saturday is prime time for vendors and venues. So they're gonna charge their prime time rate that day. If you consider maybe a Thursday, Friday, Sunday, a lot of times you'll be able to get a better deal because that's not that vendor's prime date. So depending on the day and depending on the vendor, you might actually be able to save up to 20% by doing it on a different day of the week besides Saturday. Of course, it depends on the area that you live in and the vendor or venue that you're considering and the day of the week that you're considering, but it really can save you a lot of money. So if you're not tied down to a Saturday, it's worth looking into or at least pricing out other options. So tip number 4 is all about that dress. So my suggestion here is if you have your eye on a specific designer, wait until their trunk show because you're actually going to be able to get discounts on trunk show days at bridal salon. So trunk shows are actually days that are specified usually on the website or Instagram of the bridal salon where a specific designer is showcasing all of their gowns from a specific collection. So because they are showcasing all of their gowns that day, because they may not always be in that salon, you're more likely to get a better deal that day during a trunk show. So tip number 5 is actually about the decor at your wedding. So one really great way to save is, if you think about it, live products are always going to be more expensive than what we call hard goods. Live products are things like your beautiful florals and greenery and anything that's alive. Hard goods are things that are more like candles, lanterns, things of that nature that don't have a lifespan. So candles, lanterns, those types of things are always going to be more bang for your buck than something like flowers or greenery. My next tip is also about decor, and I cannot stress this enough. Repurpose, repurpose, repurpose. And by this I mean take things from one event to another. So let's say you're having a welcome party. Why not use the centerpieces from that welcome party at maybe your bridal luncheon the next day? That way, you only have to pay somebody to transfer them from one place to another rather than pay for all of the centerpieces all over again. Or perhaps you could utilize your ceremony chairs at your reception tables. While the guests are at cocktail hour, you can have somebody transfer all of those chairs from the ceremony to the reception. And this saves you on cost. That way you're only having to pay somebody to essentially flip those chairs from the ceremony to the reception. You're not having to pay per chair for a brand new chair for everybody in the reception. So I'm a huge fan of repurposing, also called flipping. So that's a huge tip that's really behind the scenes and not a lot of people that aren't in the industry know about. So tip number 7 is another one that a lot of people don't really know about if you're not in the industry, and you don't really think about until you're at the wedding. And that's the fact that you don't have to do 100% of everything. Meaning, let's take menu cards, for example. A lot of times people think, oh, okay, I have 300 guests, I need 300 menu cards. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Instead of doing one menu card per place setting, you could always do 1 or 2 menu cards framed on each table. And that would be, 30 to 60 menu cards instead of, 300 menu cards. So another place that you could save would be your wedding programs. At ceremonies, we oftentimes don't see 100% of the guests take a program. So I always say back off of that number and do maybe 75% of your guest count to get wedding programs. Same thing for flip-flops. If you're having flip-flops for guests to change into to dance in later in the evening during the reception, most of the time only the females take the flip-flops. It's very rare that we see the males take the flip-flops. So we would say maybe 50% of your guest count instead of 100% of your guest count. So think through the items that you're ordering for the wedding and try and decide if, in reality, are 100% of the people coming to the wedding going to utilize this item. So tip number 8 is all about the bar. So I know this is a huge piece of the pie when it comes to the wedding budget. The alcohol can be so expensive. So there's a lot of different tips and tricks and ways to get around spending the bulk of your budget in this category. So of course, if you can afford it, an open bar with liquor, beer, wine, champagne, signature drinks, of course everyone wants that. So if you have the budget for it, great. But if you don't, then what my suggestion would be is a few things. First, consider doing just beer, wine, and champagne throughout the whole night. If you know your crowd is a liquor crowd, you could incorporate a signature cocktail into that instead of doing a full bar. Or if you know your crowd is maybe, say, vodka drinkers, just incorporate vodka and the mixers that would be associated with that instead of the whole gambit of all of the different liquors. Another secret way that I try to save my clients money is to actually shut down the bar during dinner. Now, there's a few ways to do this. The first being if you shut down the bar during dinner and that's it. Most people are really focused on their food, so if you don't have a big drinking crowd and you think that they would be fine with just eating and drinking water during that dinner portion, then maybe you could get away with it. But for most of my clients, what we actually do is pass wine tableside during dinner. So that means we shut down the full bar during the dinner, and while everybody's seated, we have the wait staff come around and offer red or white wine. And so you're only paying 1 drink per person for that hour. Now, definitely price it out because depending on the wine that you select and depending on the venue that you select, things can be a little bit different as far as pricing. If you pick a really high-end wine and everybody gets a glass of that during dinner, you might end up paying more money. So definitely price it out, make sure that it makes sense. But that's a little secret trick that I like to provide to my clients to make sure we can save during your wedding and your guests really don't know the difference. My 9th tip is in regards to invitations and paper products. So in general, there are several different types of printing processes that you can go with for invitations, but flat print is always going to be the least expensive. So if paper products aren't necessarily the thing that you find the most important in the wedding, the way to save on that would be to go flat print instead of doing something like engraving or letterpress or thermography. Flat print is going to save you and give you a lot of bang for your buck there. Also, make sure you look at the weight of the cardstock. The heavier the cardstock, the more expensive it's going to be. So if you go a little bit thinner and lighter on the paper, you're also going to save money there too. So my final tip, tip number 10, is all about saving on what's not as important to you and splurging on what's more important to you. So circling all the way back to my very first tip about creating that wedding budget, you want to think about what's most important to you. Is it the band that you've always wanted? Or maybe to you it's the food has to be amazing. But pick your 1 to 3 top most important things at your wedding and then put more money in those buckets. And then think through the things that maybe aren't as important to you. You know, who knows? For you, it might be the flowers or the invitations or something maybe that you don't feel like is your most important thing. Well, great. That's totally fine. Maybe you can save a little bit in those categories in effort to then splurge on the categories that are more important to you. For every bride and groom, it's different. So whatever makes you happy and you know is going to be great for your guests and is going to save you money on your budget, I say go for it. That's it for today, guys. I hope you liked these budget-saving tips on how to get the most bang for your buck at your wedding. If you found value in this video, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe and hit the like button. You can always find us on Instagram at @asyouwish_DFW, and a little bit more about my personal life at Rachel Burt Garcia, and I'm also on TikTok with that same handle. So make sure and tune in next week where we talk about the wedding day timeline, why you need it, and how to build it. So until next time, bye babes.